All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome at 6 o'clock and May 4th, 2021 Placerville Planning Commission meeting. So if you can all go ahead and stand me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Great, good evening, everyone. Welcome at 6 o'clock and May 4th, 2021 Placerville Planning. Okay, there we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Painter, can you go ahead and call roll?
Good evening, everyone. Member Friend.
Hi.
Member Gottberg.
Here.
Member Keeney.
Here.
Chair Lepper.
Here.
Member List.
Okay, great. So our next order of business is to approve the consent calendar. We'll go ahead and approve the agenda, the minutes from the April 20th meeting, and receive and file the bylaw amendment that we discussed at the last meeting and adopted. Has everyone had a chance to look over the agenda for tonight, the minutes and the bylaws?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Does anyone have any changes, or I'll entertain a motion to approve?
If there's no changes, I'll move to adopt the consent calendar.
Wonderful. Do I have a second? Okay, Nicole, second. Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to approval? Okay, seeing none, we will consider those approved. Next up, we will do communications. Mr. Painter, do we have any communications with us tonight or to us?
The city staff did receive 2 communications. However, they were received after the distribution of the packets for tonight. So they will be carried over to the next agenda as communication items. But to announce the authors, to let them, if they're in the audience tonight, to let them know that we have received them. One of the communications is from Jennifer Chapman, received on Friday, the 30th of April. And the second one we received today from Celia Lux.
We'll look out for those at the next meeting. So next, we'll go ahead and move to the public comment period, where those persons wishing to address the commission on matters germane to our subject matter can address the commission. So Mr. Rivas, do we have any members of the public wishing to address the commission tonight?
Yes, we do. Jennifer Chapman has raised her hand.
Okay, Jennifer, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi there, thank you. You can hear me?
We can.
Great, and thank you regarding the communication piece. It's regarding the historic district, just so you'll see that coming, and the reconnaissance survey work that I mentioned that was done for Friends of Historic Hangtown. It'll give you a sense of just what some survey work looks like. This is just for the historic district, downtown historic district, from Sacramento Street to Cedar Ravine. So when we talked last meeting, you guys talked about, what would it take to update the whole historic resources inventory? That would be for the whole city. This is just, this one, downtown corridor. The city, of course, would involve more than that. But anyway, I look forward to talking more about that at the next meeting. And I guess other than that, I'll just say I just appreciated these education pieces that you're bringing to the public. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you very much for your comments. So tonight we are doing a educational workshop meeting, basically, where we're going to have 2 videos presented to us, and Mr. Painter has the details about those videos. Just as an FYI, it's about, I think, 40 minutes for the first one. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. 40 minutes for the first one. And then for item 5, that's about 30-minute running time. Before I start the video for item 4, our technology is rather limited. And so I want to apologize right up front for the video quality, not of the speakers. Those images are, it's very clear who's speaking, but the exhibits that Ms. Blosser is presenting up on a screen, in most cases, they're very difficult to read. So therefore, staff did provide as a exhibit to this item, the actual exhibits that Amanda Blosser provided to the workshop that was done back in June of 2015. That's the several page document that I have up right now. For those in the audience that I strongly advise you to go, and I will tell you where that can be found on the website right now. I'll share the screen and do that. Once again, you will find it very beneficial to have that with you as you're listening to what's presented tonight. So I'm going to take the screen over now and show the public where they can find this document to help with item 4. So so you want to go to our city main web page. There are a couple of places to find it. The quickest of which, you scroll down from the main screen to the city meeting section, kind of at the lower bottom end of the web page, and click tonight's item or agenda, May 4th. And there's tonight's agenda in front of us. We scroll down to the actual item 4, which is highlighted as a hyperlink. We'll direct you to my brief staff report, and then Exhibit A, the link to that is on page 2. So if you click that, that should direct you to the exhibit that Ms. Blosser of OHP provided to a workshop that was conducted jointly by the city as well as State Office of Historic Preservation back on June 4th, 2015. So I'm going to stop share briefly in order to start the video.
Let's start with the last presentation of the day. And the most exciting presentation of the day. Historic district survey and landmark designation as part of our land use planning process.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I don't like microphones, but my name's Amanda Blosser. I'm the survey coordinator at the office.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair and Andrew, is there any way to boost the volume on this? I can barely hear the audio.
Really low.
Yeah, let me try it again.
Okay.
Get started with the last presentation of the day.
Is that any better?
Could you put, yeah, it's a little bit low.
Marginal, if anything.
And the most exciting presentation of the day. Historic district survey.
Does it go any higher than that?
Yeah, I'm up to 100% on the video itself. Yeah, you may remember from the last meeting, I had to do something similar. And so let's try that. I'll stop it, ask for some feedback from you all, and then we can modify as needed. Let me give it a shot.
Yeah.
So are you seeing an image right now with the words on break and in front of a man standing at a podium?
No,
No, I'm seeing you.
all of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now
And landmark designation as part of our land.
How's that?
That's better.
everyone else here okay? Okay.
Start over here.
get started with the last presentation of the day, and the most exciting presentation of the day. Historic District Survey and landmark designation as part of our land use planning process.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I don't like microphones, but my name's Amanda Blosser. I'm the survey coordinator at the Office of Historic Preservation. A lot of what I do is work with local communities who are interested in doing a historic resource survey. So I'll be talking about that, the basic process, and talking about local designation. Okay. So just a basic overview. Survey of historic resources we think is a valuable tool in the planning process. It's probably the most valuable planning tool. I'm a little biased because I like doing surveys. And then landmark designation is also very valuable. As Illy showed you, you can tie a lot of incentives to local landmark programs. And we consider both of them to be a very necessary parts of a local preservation program. So the first question, what is a historic resource survey? It's the means by which we identify and document historic resources and evaluate their significance. So there's two parts, the documentation and the evaluation of significance. And I often like to tell people that survey is both a process and a product. So it's a means of going out and doing the actual documentation, and then at the end you'll have a report. So, and that can get confusing. People use it to mean both. So first, what is a historic resource, and what are we going to document? We define a historic resource as a district, a building, site, structure, or object which exemplifies a period of history, has an association with a significant historical event, association with the lives of persons significant in our past, embodies a particular style, type, method of construction, or possesses high artistic values, and has the potential to yield information important to history or prehistory. So I have 5 in there. They're usually 4. It's and this is all based on the National Register of Historic Places. So it's A, B, C, and D. Just as a way to think about it, A is a period of history, pattern. B is person, C is architecture, and D is usually used for archaeology, potential to yield information. Yes?
Aren't these or categories
They're,
rather than and categories?
the question is, aren't they or categories instead of and? And that is yes. They only have to be significant under one of those criteria. They can be significant under 1, 2, 3, or 4. But it's an or, and or. So the steps for completing a survey. So when we're going out to look for those historic resources, the process usually involves research and planning, which is where you're going to do a lot of your background information, going to archives, doing oral histories, those types of things. Gathering information on specific properties, that would be like permit research if you have permits available, and investigating historic uses and events that are connected to those buildings, the social history aspect. So you'll do some of that background research to develop a historic context, which is basically a narrative that is a broad pattern of historical development in a community or region that may be represented by historic resources. So the historic resources are that tangible link to that development in a community. And the historic context is really the most influential factor in defining the structure of your survey effort. Okay. So the next steps would be, once you've done that background research in your organization, you're going to actually go out and do the field work, which is the fun part, doing the identification of historic resources. And once you have that pool of candidates, you're going to evaluate those resources using your established significance criteria, which we talked about earlier, were the A, B, C, and D, roughly those categories. And this is all very broad, so you can ask me specific questions if you want, but I kept it very broad so that you would get sort of an outlook of what a survey is. And then the final step is the production of the report or the documentation. And these are probably the least exciting pictures, but you can see consultants will produce a report, which is going to have your historic context, your narrative history. It's going to have a list usually of all of those properties that they've identified and evaluated. And it's going to have the actual documentation of those resources. And often we use a form in our office that's called the DPR 523 form. But communities are not required to use that. But the specific documentation is going to be like a physical description, is going to be a history of that particular building and why it's significant, some kind of outline of an argument of why it's significant using those criteria that you've established. So after the documentation, are there any questions at this point? That's just a basic overview of the survey process. First here and then second in the back.
So you had mentioned that during documentation and production that the consultant, a consultant.
I just assumed a consultant, but the group that's doing the survey, yes.
So would they also be involved with the prior steps of that process, or would that be more of the local government staffing?
So the question is, would the consultant or the group doing the survey be involved with not just the documentation, but all the prior steps? And usually whoever's going to do your survey is going to do all of those steps. Those are just the basic steps in doing a survey. Yeah. And then striped shirt, and then we'll come back to you.
I'm curious about the process of updating and maintaining the list.
Okay.
Because obviously, putting the list together is a big effort. And for example, locally, we have a great list, but the issue always becomes who's going to maintain it. Is it staff, is it volunteers, or that one guy that knows how to work the data?
So the question is about maintaining the inventory and list and updating it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about maintaining it, but I'm going to go ahead and answer your question. Each community has to decide how that's going to happen. If you have a local preservation program, meaning you have an ordinance, then you're usually going to have some part of your ordinance that requires that community to maintain an inventory and to update it. If you don't have a local preservation program, it's most likely going to be a volunteer effort. And usually you want to have somebody who has database experience, or at least is really good with an Excel spreadsheet.
As far as at the state level for your support on a survey documentation, are there fees at the state level for that service?
So the question is, at the state level, as far as services for a survey, are there fees? Well, the survey staff is one, that's me, and we don't actually do survey, but I can answer questions and provide assistance for free. I guess I could charge. My support is free, and I'm more than happy to answer questions, or if you have a survey strategy, I'm more than happy to look at it. So if that answers your question. Okay, and then Karana?
Yeah, I just happened to be looking at this yesterday. In 1980, and then I think in 86 or 87, OHP had a survey handbook. All I have is a very funky Xerox copy, but it's really actually very good, about, roof lines and what's a cornice, what's a box cornice versus whatever fascia board. Do you still have that?
The comment was that OHP in the 80s had a survey handbook, and it sounds like it was sort of a architectural dictionary that helped you with the terminology. I didn't know we had one, but I can sure try to find one, and it's something that we would definitely like to do. There are references that I can recommend, and I don't know why I haven't put those up on the website.
I can send you the PDF because actually it was done by the state and it helped make consistency throughout the state that I thought was useful.
Please send that to me, and I can always post it onto our website. That'd be wonderful. Thank you. Oh, prior to my time, but no, that's great. I didn't know that. Okay, I believe you. That's the question here.
Put your DPR forms online yet so that you can fill them out online?
The number one question, the question is, have we put our DPR forms online? And I think what you mean is, do we have a fillable form? Yes and no. We have Word documents which you can fill in, but everything will move if that's what you mean, and they're difficult to fill out. We have a fillable PDF, but there are issues with it in that you cannot insert photographs into that PDF. So there are issues. I'm going to go ahead and say this out loud. We are developing an electronic or like mobile application, which you'll be able to input the data into. And we hope to have a report function with that, which when you print that, you'll get your forms. And I'm living, this is the end product that we hope to see, and you'll be able to transmit your data to us electronically. So it's in progress, but we do move slow, unfortunately. So, well, we have limitations with Microsoft Word and with the Adobe software, and that there are certain things that we just can't do with it in order to maintain the format. So we realize that. Are there other questions, or should I go on about what you can do with the survey? Any more questions? Okay. So what do we recommend that you do with the survey, or what can you do it, and why do you want to do it? The obvious thing that we never really say is that it acknowledges that these resources have value in our community for ourselves and future generations. We always tend to overlook that. The identification of historic resources helps to determine which of those resources should be preserved. It's going to be very clear which are significant and which ones are not. It facilitates environmental reviews like CEQA and other land use decisions. Sean is our CEQA person, and I always say that so they'll call him and not me. A complete historic context and at least a reconnaissance level survey in areas that may be prone to development are going to help you make those land use decisions that you may have to make rather quickly. Those surveys will sort out what are historic versus non-historic properties within a huge survey area, so you know where to concentrate your review. You're going to want to concentrate a lot of your review on those historic resources. Ones that are not historic, you don't have to really worry too much about the demolition. Does that make sense to everybody? It also establishes a framework that the planning staff can use to determine the eligibility of properties and to determine whether properties may require additional study. So if you have a survey and somebody should come in with some kind of permit and you don't know whether that's a historic resource, if you have a survey, you may be able to determine whether it is. That sort of condenses that timeline. Any questions about what you can do with a survey? Okay, so maintenance of survey records. Here's an issue that was brought up earlier. A local preservation program, one of the key components is maintaining that list of surveyed properties. It's a love-hate thing because with the technologies, it can be as simple as a list, an Excel spreadsheet, an access database. I think lots of communities have GISs, so people are moving to a more sophisticated inventory and that it's hooked to their GIS. As you can see, the city of Sacramento just maintain a paper copy of their survey and their register. They also do have some maps. I assume that for internal use, those landmarks are in their GIS, but I don't think that the public can access it. Ventura had this really interesting project. They had an intern who came in, and she developed this Google map of all of their historic and cultural landmarks, and it was just, she used the Google API. That's all I know about that. It was her project, and actually she's now decided to go back and get a grad degree in historic preservation, so it was a win in my book. So you can see there's a lot of diversity in how you maintain your inventory. This is Riverside's off their historic preservation page, and it looks like they maintain a list of districts and landmarks. I don't know. I don't think you can access like individual records. One of the benefits of having an inventory and making it public is that the public can actually view it. They can search it and query it by property type, address, location, architectural style, architect, and date of construction. A lot of times people want that information. They're really interested in it. We also do recommend that you update a survey every 5 years. Okay. Well, we recommend. It doesn't always happen. There's no big pot of money to do surveys. The very few limited funds we have, we give out a CLG grant. You have to be a CLG in order to apply for it. A lot of those grants go out to do survey work. I know Fresno is now doing a survey project with their $40,000 grant that they've matched. There was a question in the back before I go on. And the question is GIS. Oh, Geographic Information System. Sorry. Sometimes things are so common, you just assume that, you're speaking a language, you assume everybody speaks that language. So landmark designation, it's one of the programs that you can institute once you have a local preservation program. I just want to say there are 3 levels of designation. There's a federal program, which is the National Register of Historic Places, and you may hear that quite a bit. That's the criteria that I mentioned earlier, the A, B, C, and D. It's a program that the Park Service has developed, that the review of those National Register applications happens in our office. It takes about a year to landmark, to list a property on the National Register. We have three state programs, the California Register of Historical Resources, and that also has a set of criteria. They're much like the ones for the National Register. Instead of A, B, C, and D, they're 1, 2, 3, and 4. They have some different ways that they deal with properties like moved buildings and resources like that. We also handle the California Historical Landmark Program. Sometimes people refer to it as the State Historic Landmark. Those are the properties that have the bear plaque that everybody loves. And then we also have the California Point of Historical Interest. It's often used for the site of programs. And so those are the state programs. And then the third level of designation is a local landmark program. We don't do anything. We have no hook into the local landmark program. It's something that each community adopts. They can set their own criteria for how they want to landmark. Often what you'll see is they'll use something that is similar to the National Register or to the California Register. They can always add criteria. Like Illy said, Monrovia has 7. The National Register has 4. The California Register has 4. But you can always decide what is significant to your community and write that in. And the local landmark criteria are put into the preservation ordinance. And I don't think I've seen them anywhere else. They're always in a preservation ordinance. It has a process for actually laying out how you go about landmarking a property, what types of information you want to see with that. And it also has a process for appeals. Preservation can be a very emotional issue. And, people do fight landmark designation. I just want to say about these particular programs, I just want to say that nomination to the National Register, the California Register, being listed as a historical landmark or a point of interest does not place any requirements on the property owner. Nobody's going to come in and tell you what color to paint your house or that vinyl window is an inappropriate change to your house. We have the National Register, California Register, landmark or point of interest does not give our office any land use authority. I point this out because we get a lot of calls like, I don't want my property listed on the National Register because then you're going to come in and tell me that I can't put my 2-car garage on the back. And we're like, no, we're not. You need to talk to your local jurisdiction. The actual, as we've talked about, design review and discretion is at the local jurisdiction level. And the local landmark is going to trigger your design review. So we don't really get involved. We don't get involved, period, with that. It's just not our purview. It's a very common misconception. For the National Register, I just want to say if the private property owner objects, it will not be listed. If it's a historic district, and there has to be 50% plus 1 support of that district in order to list the district. If there's less than that, it will not be listed. If it's a public entity that owns the building, they don't count. You can just list it. So I always like to say that. They can't object. That includes the federal government. The historical landmark and the point of interest, I believe, are the same. You cannot list them over owner objection. So there's no private property issues here whatsoever. So
if you can landmark a publicly owned building, how do you do that? Because don't you usually have to do this through the jurisdiction?
So the question is, how do you landmark a publicly owned building? If it's a federally owned building, you have to know there's the National Register applications go through our office, and one of the things that we are required to do is to notice the owner that there is a nomination being proposed for their building. That includes the federal preservation officer for whatever agency may own it, and it's the same for a state. So if you want to nominate a building in a state park to the National Register, we notice the state park. So that's how it happens. Same with the local government as well. Yeah. Any member of the public.
Also, just to add something to that, if a building is nominated, if it's not owned by a public entity, if it's owned by a private individual, if a building is nominated to the National Register, but the owner objects, it can still be heard by the commission. It just can't be listed on the National Register over owner objection, but it can be formally determined eligible for listing by the State Historical Resources Commission, which will automatically list the building on the California Register, thereby making it a historical resource for the purposes of CEQA. So it's a little.
And that is really like the worst little hitch that most people don't know. But the comment that Sean had was that buildings will not be listed on the National Register over owner objection. But what happens is the nomination will still be heard by the State Historic Resources Commission, and it can get what we call a determination of eligibility, meaning that it's been determined that it's eligible for the National Register, which automatically lists it on the California Register, which means for the purposes of CEQA that is a historical resource. So that's a lot of legalese that we could probably write out for you, but and as Karana was brave to point out, that happened with the Fulton Mall. Yeah. And that was a huge big mess. So
and that just happened now with Capitol Towers in Sacramento, and that's a huge big mess. So it's sort of a strange legal sort of catch.
Okay, I understand you say if it's heard and then it's listed as a resource for purposes of CEQA, but the property owner has no obligation or responsibility. It doesn't have to be listed. Blah blah blah. Why is it a big mess? Do they have to meet some requirements in the event of sale?
Typically, so the question is, why is it a big mess? Why does this cause a problem? So typically when this happens, it's because the property owner is proposing an adverse change to the building, and then and it's not previously a listed resource. And so once it's a historic resource for the purposes of CEQA, then that would trigger them to do additional environmental review that they weren't expecting to do
Which is costly.
prior to
mainly.
it being listed on the California Register.
And it was out of their hands. They didn't propose it, they didn't want it, they didn't ask for it. A third party could propose it, want it, ask for it, the process would progress, and then the owner is responsible.
So the comment was that they didn't want it, meaning the owner of the property, that a third party came along and proposed that this property was eligible for the National Register. And the answer is yes. And that's why it's so controversial sometimes, is because the owner doesn't want it. They just want to demolish their property and build their project.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they fall in love with their property
However,
and they don't demolish it.
Being listed on the California Register isn't actually what's causing CEQA to be triggered. The proposal to demolish it is what's causing CEQA to be triggered.
And we got off track a little here.
We did.
I
I'm
was trying-
sorry.
I thought you said modify.
Either would
Either one would.
Yeah, it depends. On Saturday, this Saturday, there's a CEQA workshop in Napa. I definitely suggest you check it out. I'm going to be speaking, so we can talk more about this then. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring CEQA
No, that's
into
okay.
this.
But CEQA always comes up when we're talking about designation. And so one more question, and then I'll just talk about why you want to do a local landmark program.
At one time, the state was pretty consistent on the State Historic Preservation Office of only selecting the best property, the only property, or the last property of that particular style or design or architect or whatever. Has the state gotten to the point where they're accepting more than one of the last, best, or only properties in the community?
So the comment was that the state was generally accepting the best, the last or only example of an architect, a design, or something, and has that changed? And yes, it has changed. It seems like in terms of the National Register, I'll just speak about the National and the California Register. It was geared heavily towards architecture. We're seeing a lot more properties that are nominated for their social history, for things that are not easily identifiable on the outside, but it doesn't have to be the best, the only, or the last. It just has to meet one of those criteria. So yes, it's moved away from that. Okay, so why would you want to establish a local landmark program? And we keep saying this, it helps stabilize the property values and may lead to an increased valuation of the property in the future. And it enhances the jurisdiction's attraction to visitors and is a stimulus to the economy. I'm not an economist, and I will find the study for you, but I don't have it right here. The environmental is the preservation, protection, and adaptive reuse of historic and cultural resources. They are considered green strategies, and that is a big push these days. And then the cultural, which always gets stuck at the bottom and really should be at the top, that the property preserves cultural assets and strengthens the ethnic and social character of a neighborhood. And I mean, these programs were intended, I think, to be honorary designations. Unfortunately, there's so many environmental laws that are hooked to them now that we lose that original cultural value. Are there any questions? This was pretty broad stroke. I am happy at some later date to talk to you in detail more about survey and survey methodology. It's a very difficult topic to break down when you have a very big, broad group that you're speaking to. There's a question in the back. So when so let's just pick your house. If your house is listed on the National Register, that doesn't trigger any kind of review at the federal or state level. It's the local level, the local jurisdiction that has laws and ordinances that trigger design review or alterations to a property. And the local landmark program can be tied to that.
So they may not be any different than any other residential project in the local area, is that right? As far as the review,
The National Register,
if you're on the national register, it's being reviewed at the local level.
it depends on how your community handles that. Usually what happens with most local communities is properties that are listed on the National Register will automatically be listed on the local register. But it's the local register, unless you've written that trigger that National Register is automatically listed on the local level, that triggers that review. Karana, would you agree with that?
Yeah, just parenthetically, there's nothing that's on the national register that I can think of that is not also on our local register. But if it was only on the national register, there would be no special review except unless there were federal funds involved.
Yeah, and I didn't even talk about that, but I just wanted to make the point. What I don't think most people realize that listing on the National Register and the California Register doesn't trigger any kind of review. It's your local ordinance that's the trigger.
Yeah.
And so when we get these screaming mad calls, I'm like, well, you need to call your planning department because they're the people you really want to be screaming at, not me. But no, I just wanted to make that very clear. But a lot of communities, what they'll do is anything that's listed on the National Register or California Register will just automatically be put on their local register. That's typical. It doesn't mean you have to do that way, but it's pretty common.
I always look at it almost as a protection because if you have that designation and a jurisdiction wants to come and do something that impacts your property, you can almost use that as a protection that they have to go through before they can come and take or.
So the comment was that you view the designation as a protection against somebody coming in. And I don't know whether you mean the National Register. Caltrans. Yeah, let's pick on Caltrans. It's pretty easy. In terms of the National Register, because it's a state agency, it receives federal funds and it acts in place of the Federal Highway Administration. Their program is federal law. It's the National Historic Preservation Act, and it's tied to the National Register. So those are the criteria that they used. They are required by law to evaluate the effects of their projects on historic properties. And the way they determine that is by using the National Register criteria. It doesn't protect it. It just requires that they go through an environmental review process. And if it's listed on the National Register, you cut right to the chase. You already know it's a historic property. So they don't have to go through that. They still have to go through an identification process for any other properties that may be out there, but the National Register is a known quantity, so they already know they have a historic property. But it doesn't prevent Caltrans from coming in and taking your house or demolishing it if it's in, something like that. I hate to say that, but it's a process.
You have more law behind you than if you didn't have that. When they come to that. We've already used it.
Okay. Yeah, I pick on Caltrans. It's easy. Question?
Yeah, I've been involved with projects in Fremont, and they've expanded roadways and things and demolished some historic resources or moved them or whatever, and they got stuck with using federal money, so they triggered section 106, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And when they triggered that, then it opened up the National Register landmark status, and so they had to do a whole lot more review. So if the state or city or county or whoever's using federal money to expand some of this, it triggers another level of review that you've got some leverage on.
So the comment was that lives in Fremont. There's some road projects, and this again because there's federal money. It triggers Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which is a mouthful. And because of that federal money, they do have to assess whether their project is going to have an effect on historic properties, which, like I said, is tied to the National Register. So that was the comment.
Just to kind of refocus our conversation a little bit more back on survey, I kind of wanted to give an example from the community I live in Sacramento. So the community I live in is called Oak Park. I don't know if any of you know it, but it almost has
It's
a
where
little,
the mayor is from, by the way.
yeah,
Our
has,
famous mayor.
It has a little downtown about the size of Placerville's downtown. I mean, it's very similar. It has sort of a main street. It has old buildings. Not quite as old, but it's the oldest suburb in the city. So it's got some great historic buildings. The city identified that area as a priority reinvestment area. And one of the very first things they did after identifying it was conduct a historic resources survey in Oak Park. A few years later, a developer came in, and this is in the middle of the recession. A developer came in and was able to knew exactly which buildings were identified on that historic resources survey and was able to build and demolish the buildings that were not identified as historic, build on vacant lots, and master plan that main street without damaging historic buildings. And there were guidelines built into that survey to make the new construction adapted to the character of the district. And now the whole neighborhood is on sort of a renaissance. If you get the Sacramento Bee, there have been several articles recently about downtown Oak Park and what's happening there. And I personally credit a lot of that to the historic resources survey that the city conducted early on in the planning process, before any of the development was really seen. I mean, this was the first step because they knew they had all these resources and they didn't want this developer to have to go through a whole bunch of arduous environmental review, and they wanted to see development there. And so using the historic resources survey as part of that planning process is really what we want to emphasize, and it's working it in and not seeing it as, oh, well, we're going to get the Historical Society together and we're going to go out and we're going to figure out which buildings are important, but really having it as a rigorous planning tool and then this, as part of the city's larger planning department, really.
And that project also had a really good developer too, who's used to working with historic resources. I just want to say that so it was a good marriage there. Any other comments?
I killed it with my Oak Park story.
Any other questions? General questions? Whoa, okay. Let's go ahead.
Fremont's a reasonably good-sized city, and we did a survey, I think 98 or something like that, and we identified 2,500 buildings in Fremont that were over 50 years of age. And narrowing that down to a couple 300 was extremely difficult. Is there any easier way to do that than going out and looking at each one of those?
No. The comment or the question was, Fremont went out in around 98. Your survey is from 1998. You identified approximately a couple thousand to 2,500 buildings and then narrowed it down to 300. And are wondering if there's an easier way to do a survey. Well, my first recommendation, you're still going to have to do the field work, but I would develop a historic context first. And I think that's going to allow you to sort of target your field survey. So you'll know which areas which areas developed earliest, or where you may have a density of historic resource, or buildings or structures of a certain age where you'd want to start your survey. But there's really no way to get away from doing field survey unless they've all been demolished. And you know that from looking at Google Maps or something, but no. The surveys take time and money, unfortunately. And like I said, I don't have a pot of money for survey because I would love to fund them. But the city of LA is surveying the entire city of LA. And they are 8 years into the process and will be done with the field surveys in 2016. And that's like almost 880,000 parcels that they've looked at. And this is what they consider a baseline survey. So I say if the city of LA can do it, now granted they have a lot of resources, including some money from the Getty, but if they can do it, everybody can do it, right?
Also, keep in mind, a city a city has jurisdictional boundaries that are separate from its historic neighborhoods and its historic districts. So you can identify areas, priority areas, and do historic surveys of a city in pieces. So you can say, all right, our downtown, let's do a survey of our downtown first. And then we have a 1920 suburb over here. Let's do a survey of that, a neighborhood next. And then we have a 1940s suburb over here, and let's do a survey of that next when funding becomes available. But it's identifying that sort of long-term, which pieces do we want to do first? Where are our development priorities?
And I know the city of Sacramento, their preservation director, the way she does it is she builds her survey into areas where they're developing like a specific plan. The survey is built into that project, so they have to do a survey of that area. So if they're doing some kind of environmental impact report, a survey is a mandatory part. And so she may not be out surveying the entire city, but she's getting certain portions surveyed, and then her inventory is growing. So, I mean, that's the way she's found that she can do it.
Yeah, and those specific plans are typically tied to areas that they want to develop.
Yeah, that are prone to development or fast tracked.
So she's sort of using that tool and those funding mechanisms as a way to survey the areas that are most likely going to be developed. So.
So Chair Leopard, that concludes the video.
Just started with the last presentation of the day.
Turn it off again.
The most exciting presentation of the day. Historic district.
Apparently it's on a loop.
That's okay.
I do have to share something. Looking at you all, the last couple of meetings, I keep looking for Barbara. She's not on the screen. Nothing against you, Nicole. Just I kind of expect to see Barbara there, and I just thought I'd share that with you. I don't know if you have the same type of a thing. Anyway.
Interesting on that, Andrew. Barbara has a real keen interest and engagement in history in Placerville. Mm-hmm. I hope she's been kind of following along with these, frankly.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and do a quick public comment on, see if there's public comment on this topic, and then we can get into questions and comments by any commissioners. So Pierre, do we have any public comment on this presentation?
We have 3 attendees, and let's see, we do have one hand raised. Jennifer Chapman wishes to speak.
Okay. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Jennifer.
I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, this is really a perfect intro to talking about this other item that I've sent by email, and it does make me wonder if those folks are actually still there with the state. And I guess my main thought, I appreciate it. They're making it very clear about the importance of the local ordinance, and I guess if going into looking at ordinances comes up, a couple that we've been talking about, looking at the city of the Redlands, I guess, is supposedly got a really strong preservation ordinance and resources. But also, of course, Nevada City is another one that's often compared to Placerville. So I just want to highlight those two. I'm sure there's many more. And then I just wanted to say, I flashed on, this, I think they talked about the role of an intern, and it just would be, I know that the city did some outreach and to the, Sacramento State with those history presentations, and just, it would be so great to get some student interns working on some of this stuff. And we know it's expensive, but it's very educational. It's inherently educational, and it is a great opportunity, I think, for students to work on a place like Placerville. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm just going to request Jennifer to hang in there, because when we're all done, if I have permission of the chair, I'd like to be able to ask her a question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead. We'll wrap up public comment and then circle back around to that.
You have Ruth Michelson, which wishes to speak.
Okay, Ruth, you may go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I came on late, not till 6:15, so I didn't hear everything, but I'm so glad you had this video, and I'm glad that I can go back and see the whole thing. I'm sure it's, archived in your meeting. And I will do so because I'm very interested in downtown having a historic district. And what I really learned from the parts that I heard tonight were that it takes 50% plus one. And I just was hoping for clarification. I'm assuming that means of the downtown building owners, 50% plus one, of which I am a building owner. So that was one thing, if someone could explain that to me. And then the other was, I thought it was interesting that it was a misconception that anything could be forced upon a building owner, and it's all at the local level, which is your level, which is your planning commission, as far as what rules are enforced when a historic district is formed. So, this is all kind of new to me, feeling my way, trying to learn as I go, very interested in it. And it's kind of sometimes dense, meaning, thick, concentrated material for a lay person to understand. But I try to learn as I go. And so any help with it would be so appreciated. And I know Pierre knows a lot about this. So again, back to what does it take? And the last thing I wanted to mention is I've heard that when you do create a historic district, it can be at like 3 different levels, which is sort of contrary perhaps to what the speaker had just said. But the highest level is, yes, you do have some pretty strong requirements about what you do to the exterior to your building. And the middle one is having to do with the planning commission. You go in front of them and they will, you talk to them about windows and colors and that kind of thing. And then the lowest level really is in name only. So again, I'm kind of in the dark trying to understand it, and any clarification any of you may have would really help me. So thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public with comment on this educational video?
We don't have any more members wishing to speak.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and close public comment and I'll bring it back to the commissioners. Do you guys have any comments, questions, anything you want to contribute after the video?
If I might, Madam Chair, and if Jennifer is still in the audience, the question I would ask her is, is she familiar with the process for the landmark designation as was described in the program, in the presentation? And then they talk about a process for appeals. I presume that is when a property is being proposed for one of these. But my question to Jennifer is, do you have any knowledge about a repeal or a revocation process? Are you aware? Have you heard of that? And she may not be in the audience anymore. But if she is, I'd like to know if she knows anything about that.
Okay, it looks like Jennifer is still present. So Jennifer, you're unmuted. You can go ahead and respond.
So I think the question is related to the California Historic Landmarks, the CHO. I think that's what the question is about. And
yes.
Okay. I guess the main thing that I do understand is, just from talking to the State Historic Preservation Office, is mainly that they recognize that the sort of the standards and the bar of what sort of got designated as CHL has changed a lot over time, as the whole, just this whole preservation, I guess, sort of discipline has evolved. So, for instance, they definitely have some ideas, and I will say, just from talking with them, they would definitely not assume that some of the early CHL that were designated, way back when in the 30s or whenever, that they would pass based on what the documentation, that was submitted back then, that they would, if they were re-examined. So I am not entirely sure, but it does seem like there's that state historic, the commission that reviews the nominations, and so I think it would be a simple question of, can you nominate something for removal? And it would be like decommissioning something. I don't know if they do that or not, but I do know that they recognize that some of the documentation from the early days is not very solid.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners with comments, questions, anything regarding the video we just watched?
Just make a quick comment. I do see a lot of value in historic surveys. I use them a lot kind of on the environmental impact report side and CEQA side as part of my career. So I do think it's very useful to have an up-to-date survey when you're looking at any sort of environmental impacts of a project, a development project, or modifications. So I think it's a super useful tool. I know they always cost money, and that's always, if you fund that, what do you not fund? But it is something that I think is a great sort of tool to have for any city.
Thank you.
Only one comment. The landmark designation, one of their slides said the nomination to the national or California does not place any requirements on the property owner. And then she went on to say that, I think some of her words were actually something like, without exception, they also belong to a local. And as we know, historical districts do carry requirements for the homeowner. So I wouldn't want a homeowner or the downtown merchants to think that if this goes through, if something went through like this and we had to register, that there wouldn't be any impact on the individual property owners.
Yeah, that was interesting that the difference, essentially clarifying or what's the word I'm looking for? Showing that the local ordinances really kind of come into play the most when it comes to the property requirements, which we are familiar with our local historic districts. So yeah, that comparison and the tiered level and the automatic versus local things was really interesting. And as Jennifer said, it was kind of dense. I mean, that was a lot of information, at least for me to absorb it all, but really interesting on what actually comes into play around requirements once they're listed as historic. So something to be perhaps dug in a little bit more. Okay, any other comments, questions, anything on that one? Okay, does anyone need a break or anything before the next video, or are you guys ready for the next video? Ready? Okay, not hearing any breaks. I'm gonna go ahead and have Mr. Painter introduce our second video of the evening, which...
Yeah, let me get that prepped.
Yeah. Item 5, the community of choices. Viewfinders 2, exploring the community appearance.
Like I did last time, I will play it a short segment. I'll come back to you. Let me know on the audio.
Perfect.
Right now, there is no speaking, no music, so.
No intro?
No.
This is a story about connections.
Sounds good to me. Does anyone else have any issues? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and play the video.
Connections between conservation and economic development, between the community's appearance and its quality of life, between the man-made environment and the natural environment, and perhaps most important of all, between people and the places they live. 30 years ago, the former Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall wrote something that is sadly more true today than ever. America today stands on a pinnacle of wealth and power, and yet we live in a land of vanishing beauty, of increasing ugliness, of shrinking open space, of an overall environment diminished daily by noise, pollution, and blight. Please don't misunderstand. America is the world's leader in environmental protection. Over the last 30 years, we've passed many laws to reduce air and water pollution, clean up toxic waste, protect our sand dunes and wetlands. We've encouraged energy conservation and recycling, added thousands of buildings and monuments to the National Register of Historic Places, and millions of acres to our state and national parks. But despite these successes, the special character of America's small towns and our countryside has been disappearing faster than ever. At the same time we've been saving some landmarks, we've been losing the landscape that gives these landmarks their larger sense of meaning. And while we've been cleaning up air and water pollution, we've been losing our sense of place. I mean, if you were suddenly dropped along a road outside of almost any American city, you wouldn't have the slightest idea where you were, because it all looks exactly the same. You wouldn't know if you were in Albany or Allentown, Providence or Pittsburgh, Charlotte or Cincinnati. As the famous Western author Wallace Stegner once wrote, "If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are." All of us have a fundamental need for a sense of orientation, a sense of roots, a sense of place. What is sense of place? First, it's what makes your hometown different from my hometown. Second, and perhaps more important, it's what makes our physical surroundings worth caring about. In many parts of America, we are suffering the social consequences of living in places that simply aren't worth caring about. For all the improvements we've made in cleaning the air and water, building roads and schools, faster computers, many people still ask, is this all there is? Can't our communities be more distinctive, more livable, more beautiful? A few years ago, Victoria Tashinkle, the former Secretary of Natural Resources for the state of Florida, said, "I think we can probably take care of pollution-related problems in Florida, but even if we do, I'm not sure this is going to be a very nice place to live because of the density of population and the lack of sense of community. Florida could end up as just one convenience store after another." Her words are true for cities and towns all over America. Growth is both certain and desirable, but the destruction of community character and natural resources that too often accompanies growth is not inevitable. Progress does not demand degraded surroundings. Communities can grow without destroying the things that people love. The real questions are not whether your town will grow, because it will, or whether it will change, because it will. The real questions are how. How will it change and how will it grow? As our communities expand, we need to plan for growth by carefully planning and managing the patterns of development. To accomplish this, communities must consider three things. Where do you put development? How do you arrange it? And what does it look like? Here are some examples of what is meant by patterns of development. This is the cornfield at Antietam, Maryland, the site of the bloodiest day in the history of the United States. During the Civil War, 23,000 Americans fell here on a September afternoon in 1862. If you visit this place, you can almost visualize the waves of infantry moving across the field, sense the urgency and how history was changed there that day. Yet the National Trust for Historic Preservation once listed this site as one of the nation's 10 most endangered historic places. It's off the list today, thanks to the hard work of many people. But what was it in danger of? If you travel 100 miles south to Spotsylvania County, Virginia, you'll find the site of the South's greatest victory in the Civil War, the Battle of Chancellorsville. This is the Salem Church that was a key feature during the fighting, a makeshift Confederate fortress. After the battle, it served as a hospital for the wounded of both sides. Lovingly restored, the church is not only a national historic landmark, but a classic example of saving a structure and losing a place. This is why the battlefield at Antietam was in danger. So what's wrong with this picture? There are better places in America to put a shopping center than in the middle of our historic and hallowed grounds. The point is, some places are better for development than others. The first principle of better development is planning where you should and should not develop. Every community needs a blueprint for how it wants to grow. Two tools used for this are a conservation plan and an economic development plan. These allow us to have both conservation and development, and to help communities preserve their identities. But part of the problem is how we think about conservation and development. This is a view of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and this, a town just outside the park. Sometimes we think there are only two choices: either preserve the land or develop all of it. Either create a park with nobody living in it or allow ugly, environmentally insensitive development right next door, even though the landscape there may be just as outstanding. But these aren't the only choices we have. We have a third choice. We can have growth and development that respects and enhances the character of our communities and that complements the quality of our landscape. This concept has different names: sustainable development, smart growth, but it's really about development that's good for the environment, good for business, and good for the community. Let's consider a few examples, starting with something very simple: residential street design. If you're a developer, the most expensive part of the development process is building the streets. So let's look at this subdivision in Wisconsin, where the street is 24 feet across from curb to curb. In this Virginia subdivision, on the other hand, the street is 40 feet across. On which street would you rather live? On which street do you think the houses are more affordable? Which street is better for the environment? And which street is safer for children? First, compare the cost of the houses. If you add 16 feet of pavement to the width of the street, you increase the cost of the houses along that street by thousands of dollars. So more pavement means less affordable housing. More pavement also means more soil erosion, more sedimentation, and more water pollution going into our rivers and streams. And as far as safety is concerned, the 24-foot wide street is 4 times safer than the 40-foot wide street. Why? Because the wider the streets are, the faster the cars go. So being more flexible on residential street standards is good for business, good for the environment, and good for the community. Now think about trees. Here are 2 streets with identical houses on each. Which street do you think has higher property values? Which street has lower utility bills? And on which street would you rather live? Studies show that developed lots with trees sell for an average of 20 to 25% more than similar-sized lots without trees. The temperature here on a hot summer day can be 6 degrees higher than the temperature here on that same day. As it turns out, dollars do grow on trees. In short, trees are good for business, good for the environment, and good for the community. What about shopping centers? Would you prefer to shop in a center heavily landscaped with trees and bushes? Or would you prefer to shop here? Well, look at what happened in Baldwin County, the southernmost county in Alabama on the shore of the Mobile Bay. Baldwin County was once a very hard place to get to until Interstate 10 was built. In a short time, investors started buying up land along other highways, cutting down the live oak trees and replacing them with strip malls. But many of the residents didn't like what was happening to their trees. So they proposed the first law in the state to preserve large trees, specifically in the parking lots of commercial buildings. Those who objected to this regulation said things like, "Nobody will go to the grocery store if there's a tree in front of it." So the county conducted a public opinion poll and asked their citizens if they would prefer to shop at a center heavily landscaped with trees and bushes or one without such landscaping. What happened? By a wide margin, people said they preferred trees to asphalt. And they passed that regulation, the first one in Alabama's history. This was the beginning of Baldwin County thinking about the relationship between community character and economic development. Now let's consider the gateway to a community, its front door. Just like with meeting a person, a good first impression is important, a bad one hard to change. So would you rather visit Franklin, Tennessee, or Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks like a community with a sense of pride and a sense of place? Which one looks like a place you would rather spend time and money in? Every day, people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, and where to retire based on what our communities look like. The image of your community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. Think about visiting a new town or city, for instance. The more one community looks like every place else in America, the less reason there is to visit. On the other hand, the more a community does to enhance and preserve what makes it unique, the more reason there is to go there. That's because tourism is about seeking out those places in the world that are different, unusual, and unique. If every place was just like every place else, there'd be no reason to go anyplace. That's why the image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. Do you think tourists would rather see scenic views that look like this or scenic views that look like this? As the Urban Land Institute once noted, housing, hotels, and offices with scenic views always command premium prices. The better the view, the higher the price. Now think about where you live. Before World War II, America had a model for development that worked for over 300 years. We called it a town. But after World War II, people decided to rearrange things. While we still have buildings, we now throw shopping centers over here and we put schools over there and put our houses over here. The result, we have to drive everywhere for everything. Recently, though, a national survey showed most people would prefer to shop in a town center if they had a choice. As a result, we're actually building town centers again for the first time in 50 years. An example is Cascade Village in Loudoun County, Virginia. This would have been a strip shopping center just 5 or 6 years ago. As another example, this is Barnes & Noble Super Bookstore, located on a busy highway just outside of Washington, D.C. Notice the big parking lot in front. It's similar to what you'd see in strip shopping centers all over America. On the other hand, this is Barnes & Noble's store located in downtown Bethesda, Maryland. It's built right on the sidewalk. And while there's parking in the neighborhood, there's no parking lot directly in front of the building. So which one do you think makes more money? The one with the big parking lot in front, or this one? Surprising to many, the downtown store makes 15% more per square foot than the one on the strip. And the reasons? Well, think about how you get to these two stores. The only way to get to the one on the strip is to drive. But there are more ways to get to the other store. You can walk because it's located in a neighborhood, or you could ride your bike, or take the subway, or you could drive. And when you do get here, you'll find yourself in a real neighborhood where people hang out, walk around, and window shop. How many people do you know who go to strip shopping centers to hang out? In short, merchants in town centers are more successful because people spend more time on Main Street. In fact, the idea of a Main Street is the single hottest retailing concept in America today, a vision we abandoned 50 years ago. People are still drawn to these main streets because they're natural gathering places where you can enjoy a cup of coffee, read a magazine, meet your friends, or window shop. In addition, many communities are realizing why it's important to identify and preserve their historic buildings, neighborhoods, and landscapes, because they physically link us to our past, tell us who we are and where we came from. Preserving historic buildings is good for the heart and soul of a community, but it's also good for the pocketbook of a community. Let's look at a small example. This used to be the fire station in a small Midwestern town. When it became obsolete as a fire station, it was turned into a pizza parlor, but sales were low, so the owner of the restaurant restored the appearance of the building, physically linking his customers to the roots in the past. What else happened? Within the first year, pizza sales went up by 75%, showing how preservation can be enormously good for the bottom line. Or consider some larger examples, such as the Riverwalk in San Antonio, Texas. This is one of the nation's leading tourist attractions and the basis of the city's billion-dollar tourism industry. What most visitors don't know, however, is that at one point the cities thought so little of this small river, they tried to put it underground into a culvert. In Seattle, Pike Place Market is the epitome of the city's working waterfront. Today, it is the single leading destination in Washington, visited by 11 million people a year. Yet less than 30 years ago, the city seriously suggested demolishing the Pike Place Market to create a parking lot in its place. You can have all the parking in the world, but if you have nothing to do, then why would you want to go there? And in Florida, you'll find the Art Deco Historic District in South Miami Beach. It's the largest collection of Art Deco buildings in the United States. Once again, all were scheduled for demolition. Yet today, people come from all over the world to visit this place. While most people are in favor of preserving the best of their past, they also need to think about what's being built today that will be worth preserving tomorrow. In other words, what buildings will you and your children fight to save 50 years from now? This is an important question, Because 80% of everything ever built in America has been constructed since the end of World War II. And as Winston Churchill once said, we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. Meaning the physical character of our communities affects our sense of community. But it's hard to have a sense of community in a parking lot. So how can we get new buildings to enhance the character of our communities? Does every franchise and chain store in America have to look exactly alike? Of course not. New buildings can be designed to fit in with the character of a community and can complement the quality of the surrounding landscape. Yes, that's a new McDonald's. It's in a house that was built in 1873 in the small town of New Hyde Park, New York. Prospective brides even come here to pose for their bridal photographs. Or consider this McDonald's in Stowe, Vermont. Why does it look like a typical New England-style building? Well, because it's in New England. We live in a nation of highly varied history, climate, culture, and terrain. So why shouldn't the buildings in one part of America look different from buildings in another part? Shouldn't buildings in New England look different from buildings in the Southwest? The Southwest different from the Southeast? The Southeast different from the Midwest? Shouldn't buildings in a small town like Lake Forest, Illinois, be different from buildings in a big city like St. Louis, Missouri? Yes, that's also McDonald's, at the foot of the famous Gateway Arch. It was built by a smart developer who realized that when fast food was no longer the novelty, design could be. He realized that our image of St. Louis is painted by its past. Images of the Mississippi River, Mark Twain, and riverboats, thus a McDonald's on a riverboat. The point is, if communities accept off-the-shelf corporate cookie-cutter architecture, they'll get it 100% of the time. On the other hand, if they insist on something better, something that fits with their community, they'll get that 100% of the time. Do national franchises and chain stores like to do this? No, not particularly, but they'll do whatever they have to do to be in an economically profitable location. For instance, this is the McDonald's in Freeport, Maine. The company bought this house in the 1970s with the intention of tearing it down and putting up a typical suburban-style McDonald's. But the town said, no, we want you to restore that house. McDonald's sued the town and lost. Now the company promotes this restaurant as an example of their good community stewardship. But they'll only do this when cities and towns are wise enough to say, first, we want a building that looks like it belongs in our community and not just any place USA. Of course, the idea of community pride and place can apply to more than just buildings. Let's think about tourism again, with this ad out of an airline magazine. It says a chain of hotels should reflect the city they are located in and not each other. Here's a chain motel in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, home to the country's largest Amish population. When visitors arrive, they find busy commercial strips with look-alike motels instead of what they imagine the countryside would be. Rolling green hills, white farmhouses with red barns, small old-fashioned town centers. Elkhart County, Indiana, on the other hand, is also home to a large Amish population. A few years ago, they sent a delegation to Lancaster for ideas on how to attract tourists. They came back with two big ideas. First, establish a land trust to preserve open land. Second, develop design guidelines for new tourism support facilities, giving developers a strong suggestion of what ought to be done. The result? This is one of Elkhart's new chain motels. As you can see, they learned from Lancaster's mistakes. Here's an off
Well, my apologies. This is a 2020, 2002 disc. And honestly, I did not watch it all the way through to see if there were glitches like this. I can try again to move forward in the if the file
Yeah, you want to see if you can pick it up at the 2027 and see if it works, and if
You guys want to talk amongst yourselves, or maybe invite the public to comment on what they've seen so far, and I will try to guess where we stopped and
I wrote down 20 minutes and 27 seconds.
Thank you, that's great.
Yeah, of when it paused. We'll go ahead and wait and see. Does anyone have any comments on the video thus far? I'll comment that I ate at the McDonald's they showed across the street from Gettysburg for sure. Yep, it was about a 4-hour tour and we ended up.
I've seen the one in Freeport, Maine.
Nice. Yes.
I found it very interesting that they showed a picture where they were talking about trees. The one they were promoting were the ones that it was springtime and the trees were all leafed out, and the other picture was during dead of winter. I did find that interesting.
Yeah, the contrasts they were showing were pretty stark. I would agree with that. Any other comments on it thus far? Okay, well, I'm gonna just wait and see. But I'd prefer to open public comment after the video is complete, if possible. So,
Yeah, I suggest we take a 5-minute break.
yeah, let's go ahead and do a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at say 7:30. Right on time. There you go. Okay, so we're gonna have about 10 minutes left of this video.
Okay, a 1 and a 2.
Here we go.
Or consider gas stations. The canopy of this one looks like a spacecraft.
No, it stopped again.
True, canopies prevent rain from reaching the customer, but they come in all shapes and styles. Here's one in Asheville, North Carolina that fits right in with the character of the community. Or how about this one? This new gas station is located in Waitsfield, a small town in Vermont. Notice how it looks like a country store. That's because it's in the country. How about chain drugstores like Rite Aid, CVS, Eckert's, Brooks? Here's a typical off-the-shelf Rite Aid. But this new one, located in Camden, Maine, was designed to look like a typical New England store because, once again, it's in New England. Notice how this Rite Aid in Washington, D.C. blends in with its neighbors. Or this one in Lake Placid, New York, with stone on the bottom, articulated roofline, and wood siding. Such designs are common in the Adirondacks. And what about the big box retailers like a Kmart or Walmart? Here's a typical Kmart. This on one hand is the Kmart in Jackson, Wyoming. This is a community trying to preserve its Western heritage. So this Kmart with clock towers on each end, articulated roof lines, and a wooden front looks like it belongs. Sometimes people say it's too late for our community. We already have too much clutter. Actually, it's never too late. Community character deteriorates slowly over time, but it can get better in small steps. For instance, this used to be a McDonald's in Asheville, North Carolina. Now there's a new McDonald's built on the site of the old one. This is a city that's decided that community character is important, so they're improving it one building at a time. Your community can get better too, one street, one building, and one development at a time. The famous oceanographer Jacques Cousteau used to say, "People will save what they love." But how can we create the sense of love and caring for our communities? One way is through education and interpretation. Every community has a story to describe these traditions through historic markers, interpretive displays, and public art. For example, this is the Chisholm Trail mural in Fort Worth, Texas, which tells the story of how cattle drives were so important to the founding of Fort Worth. And this is the family album of Tacoma Park, Maryland. Every one of these pictures is important to that town's history. Once, Spokane, Washington once manufactured the famous radio flyer wagons. What do they have there now? This piece of playground equipment, a piece of public art that physically connects people to their city's past. Or how about Clanton, Alabama, the state's peach capital, where they use their water tower to create a sense of place and tell a story about their town. Signs tell us much about the character of a community too. Outdoor signs are important because they give us direction and needed information. A business sign can be colorful, decorative, even distinguished. All too often, however, signs are oversized, poorly planned, and badly located. They're also too numerous. So what's wrong with this picture? 3 things. It's ugly, it's expensive, and it doesn't work. Signs project the image of a community faster than almost anything else. These are before and after pictures of the same place. Think about the images the signs project. Do you want the image of your community to be classy or trashy, tacky or plain, special or ordinary, ugly or beautiful? When you look at this shopping center in Highlands, North Carolina, does it make you want to live there? When you see the sign in this other town, do you feel like you'd like to vacation here? Image is fundamentally important to the economic well-being of our communities. This is obviously a community that didn't pay attention to its image. On the other hand, communities that get more investment, more business, and more visitors pay attention to their appearance. Another aspect of signs is effectiveness. Imagine one store owner getting a big sign, then a competitor getting a bigger sign, then a third person getting an even bigger sign. Before you know it, you'd be advertising to airplanes instead of people. A cluttered commercial strip with huge signs, flags, and banners like this is ineffective because they prevent you from finding what you're looking for. It's almost impossible to absorb the overload of information on a cluttered commercial strip like this. But when you turn down the volume, every voice becomes distinct. In short, businesses do a better job of selling because people can see what they're looking for. But what exactly makes one community successful and another unsuccessful? Successful communities are good places to live, work, and invest because they do a few simple things. They make an inventory of their assets and create a vision for the future. They build all their plans, whether it's a tourism plan, an economic development plan, or a land use plan, around their assets. They use education, incentives, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulations. They pick and choose among developments, realizing not all development is created equal. They cooperate with resource managers for mutual benefit. They consider what a community looks like. They have a quality of life lobby. Let's look at these ideas in more detail. Successful communities look at what they have to offer and build their plans around their assets. Sometimes assets are obvious, such as those found in Boulder, Colorado, or Annapolis, Maryland, which has an obvious architectural legacy in a beautiful harbor. But sometimes these assets are not so obvious. Lowell, Massachusetts is an example. It was an industrial town of worn-out and abandoned mill buildings that used its architectural heritage to its advantage, creatively reusing the mill buildings for commercial space, museums, and housing. Successful communities use education, incentives, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. The town of Pella, Iowa, for instance, gives new developers a handbook about why the architectural character of that town is important. They do this because they want new franchises, chain stores, and big box retailers to fit in. Successful communities also consider what they look like. The cover of the Vermont State Tourist Brochure boasts that there are no billboards in the state. Why? Vermont is one of the 5 heavily tourism-dependent states that have removed all their billboards because they found that it is one of the most important things they can do to strengthen the tourism industry. Petersburg, Virginia, on the other hand, could have been the Williamsburg of the Civil War, but it's not because they didn't pay any attention to what they look like. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania is another community that thinks aesthetics is important. Since there were no utility wires running through the battlefield in 1863, the community worked to bury 5 miles of utility wires through that battlefield, restoring its sense of place. So what do you want your community to look like in 20 years? If you don't ask that question, it'll end up looking like any place USA. You see, there are really only 2 kinds of change in America: unplanned change or planned change. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. Finally, let's think about the social and psychological value of the ideas presented today. Why is it that people feel a sense of loss, like losing a loved one or a friend when a grove of trees is cut down, an historic building demolished, or a scenic view obliterated? It's not because we can't plant new trees or build new buildings. It's because our sense of identity is tied in a very profound way to special buildings, places, and views. Each has a rich symbolic importance which contributes to our sense of identity and well-being. In fact, long ago, an ancient Roman statesman said, cities should preserve the visible symbols of their identity to give their citizens a sense of security in a changing world. 2,000 years later, anthropologist Margaret Mead said almost exactly the same thing. The destruction of things that are familiar and important causes great anxiety in people. Economic development and environmental quality aside, what we're often trying to preserve is memory, an attempt to keep a mental image of familiar and accustomed places that make us feel comfortable and secure. The justification for preserving the special places of any community have as much to do with our need for psychological stability and cultural continuity as they have to do with beauty, ecology, or economics. Our communities can grow without destroying the things that people love. The landscapes of our states and regions, the countryside, the cities and the small towns are worth preserving not just because they're fragile and beautiful and rich in cultural and natural resources, but because they help us define who we are as a nation.
Thank you very much for that. So let's go ahead and we will open up public comment now. If there's any viewers of the public that would like to comment on the video we just watched.
I see Ruth Michelson wishes to provide comment.
Okay, Ruth, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. I thought that was really impactful. I really enjoyed that, and it put a lot of my thoughts into words. So I appreciate it. And I thought, since I spoke up earlier saying that I was for a historic district downtown, I thought maybe I should explain why. We bought our building about 5.5 years ago. It's the building that used to be Rivendell Books. It's the building 352 Main Street that has the brickwork at the back and the original 1856 iron door and iron window. In 1856, it was a saddlery. It eventually became a saloon. And then it had that underground tunnel that goes to that historic building on Pacific Street. I can't remember the name of what it's called, but it was an Asian brothel on the 2-story white block building there on Pacific. So, you know, when we bought because we appreciated the history of our town so much. And I feel as a stakeholder, I want to preserve that. And so I think that a historic district, in my mind anyway, it will help to preserve that. I don't like some of the things that have happened. I've been very open and vocal about it, so it's no secret. I don't like chain stores in our downtown because, just as this video talked about, it turns us into any town USA. And I feel as a merchant that our pull is our uniqueness, and I want to protect that. I've made an investment and I want to protect my investment. So that's why I like the idea of a historic district. And my hope is also that we will make steps to not have formula stores in the future. I know that issue will be coming in front of City Council shortly after some other things are settled, some legalities. So that's the reason why. And I thought that was just, I thought that video just said it all. And I know that one of the struggles that you as a planning commission have is how much you get involved in people's lives, the applicants' lives, and whether you feel you can hold them to certain standards or not. But I really think what you do in general is, I can't think of the right word, but it's not a right. When people come to see you and ask for permission for doing certain things, they're asking you sometimes to make exceptions to the rules. And I think that we as landowners need to know going into these things what the restrictions are. That's the responsibility. It's sort of a buyer beware kind of a thing. And I've seen in the Planning Commission some decisions recently made where I think that there was too much freedom given to the applicant, and they're trying to, anyway, I don't want to go on and on too much, but I think this whole issue that this video brought up is, what is your vision? Are you going to stick with your vision and not make exceptions that are going to dilute what we're trying to create here? And I think that's a really fundamental issue. And I hope to see that, the Planning Commission moves forward and what that vision is and can hold on to that vision. And so that's mostly what I wanted to say. Sometimes government does have to get involved and restrict people. And like I said, people should, oh, my 3 minutes, should know when they're buying buildings, you know, what the restrictions are. And okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Ruth. Any other public comment on this topic?
Jennifer Chapman wishes to speak.
Okay, Jennifer, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, am I muted? Oh, there we go.
Good.
Yeah, you know, I definitely had some good messages in it. I will say, though, I was a little disturbed by, you know, what seemed to be saying that big giant M, you know, was somehow not a problem just because maybe some aspect of the building kind of had a character that was a little different. I mean, you know, I guess I didn't totally buy everything that was being presented. I just, you know, and I guess it made me think, though, the one McDonald's that we have on Upper Broadway, and, you know, I know that's not a historic area really, or it's not been, there's not enough left up there, but, you know, that to me is such an eyesore. Whereas trying to, you know, make something, I mean, where I would say, you know, fine, make something kind of historic-esque up there at that McDonald's, but please don't bring a McDonald's down into downtown. And I did make a post because sourdough, I think it's really sad that Centro sign, just as a sign, just as an object, as an unusual, you know, visual culture, it was really interesting. And I feel like sourdough is going to be successful because of that location, no matter what. And I just think it's sad that they have to brand themselves, you know, as that, instead of, you know, just be successful because Placerville is successful. So I just think it's sad. I don't know. There's a lot of decisions, you know, really in this very short term, immediate next set of years that are going to be, you know, I think one of the key messages was having a vision. And I think somehow having a vision, especially for downtown right now, is critical. You know, I do think this idea of mixing up art district and historic district, I know it's more than just art, because I know they want to take on art, agriculture, and these other things, but I still think even if it's a cultural district, it's different than a historic district, and we should really try to find a place for both of them. So I just want to say that again. I just, I mean, I'm glad we're looking at these things. I do think, I do think there's that question, though, of like, what is Disney World? Disney World makes a lot of theme parks, and I just feel like a little bit of some of what they were showing was theme park also, as opposed to really, you know, the integrity of something that really is from the past. You know, some of the things Ruth was mentioning, and we just have so many of those things still. But, you know, the more we lose, the more dilute it gets. And I, you know, another example, and I love the Lincoln Highway thing, but I have to say those signs are kind of disturbing when you have, you know, this historic Lincoln Highway markers and marking that went on, and we still have one, you know, embedded on Main Street over there in Hangtown Cantina, what have you. So I know that's going to be an issue coming up for downtown and Planning Commission, is the Lincoln Highway signs. And it's kind of an example of, you know, is it just pretending to be or whatever, you know, it's just how you recreate the past. Sorry, thanks.
No, you're fine. Yeah, just if you could wrap it up after the 3 minutes, no problem.
Yep, thanks.
Good, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for your comments. Here.
Our last speaker would be Kirk Smith.
Okay, Kirk, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. 3 minutes for comment.
Yes, good evening. This is one of the many presentations I've seen before the Planning Commission over the last 6 or 12 years, either before the Planning Commission or sometimes done by the planning staff. And they've all been great, and they point, like this one, to some basic points. One is that when a community has standards for historic preservations, the value of property goes up. And in this instance, about the choices presented in this tape about whether you're going to have any place USA or something that's consistent with the local historic areas. So it's been talk for 6 to 12 years. So what I was going to suggest is at some point soon, you put it on the calendar for action. The first step being solicit proposed ordinances, drafts of ordinances you could look at, consider. Then you go get someplace. But otherwise, we keep talking about the value of this. Meanwhile, Old Town Sacramento gets millions of visitors every year. It brings in huge amount of tourist dollars. We do as well get tax dollars and revenue coming in because of tourism, based on the historic heritage of this town. And it seems like we would enhance that if you take that next step. So that's what I'd urge you to do. You can't do it tonight, but I hope you do it soon so we don't just kick the can around for another 6 to 12 years. And I've heard a number of members over the years say, well, but this would interfere with property rights. And I've explained, I've supplied Supreme Court cases with the idea that under the 10th Amendment, policing powers trump even the First Amendment. I don't know if you've looked at them, but please, if somebody still persists with that notion that you can't do it because of property rights, please offer me some case law. That's all. I think the public deserves it. But in the meantime, please, let's have this lead to some action. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Okay, any other comments? I don't think so. We'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of this, bring it back to the commissioners. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments they'd like to share about the video? Yeah, Commissioner Keeney.
Thank you, Amy. First, I found this second video really interesting, and in part, I'm a little concerned, very concerning for our community. We have been very focused on our downtown historic area, but looking at this video, I realize we need to take a bit of a step back and think about how we could possibly incentivize development outside of what we have designated as the historic area, and incentivize that development to reflect our community character. There are a lot of different elements in our historic area downtown. I feel that the city and the Planning Commission offers substantial protection for our historic area downtown. What I'm concerned about are the areas Upper Broadway, Placerville Drive, and I guess I want to ask of staff, and if you're not prepared to answer this, I just wonder what kind of incentives there are, what kind of steps we could take to protect Upper Broadway, Placerville Drive from getting that Anywhere USA look that they kept showing us. I really don't want, as I said, our historic area is preserved. And so how can we continue that concern to the rest of our community? Because those are the areas where we have the opportunity to develop, to improve the retail options, the services that are provided to the residents, as well as to tourists who come through our area. We think of having them access our historic area downtown, and they do. But why can't we continue those themes to other areas? I think it was Jennifer Chapman who mentioned the McDonald's. They just did a redesign on that. The Planning Commission looked at their landscaping not that long ago, and they've upgraded it quite a bit. But we saw some very interesting McDonald's options, and while I don't think we could, at this point we can't ask them to make it look like a house, like we saw in one example. It really intrigued me. What can we do? I'm not. I've read through our design guidelines, but I don't see a lot of those kinds of incentives. So to kind of wrap up my discussion here, Pierre or Andrew, is that something the city has considered? Case in point, I think there were a lot of concessions when the Home Depot went in. So what kind of things are on the books for us that we can utilize more, so that when a development project comes, we can possibly incentivize them, put a little pressure on that developer to maybe take a different look and make it whatever they're planning. So I'll just leave it. Actually, I'd like to turn it back over to staff. As I said, I don't know if you're prepared to give us an exhaustive review of our design guidelines, but if you have some ideas at hand, I would appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
You guys have any response or anything you'd like to?
I guess I'll take a shot at it, and Andrew can certainly jump in. But basically, the city has adopted the development guide, which is a set of design guidelines that both the staff, the planning commission, and the city council utilize when reviewing development proposals. And it looks at everything from architectural elements, signage, landscaping, parking design. All of that is included in there. So the development guide is, you know, as the title says, it's a guide. You know, it does provide some level of standards, but there's a lot of discretion on how the city will apply it. And so I think one of the things I think we could gather from the video is that really the community needs to take a tougher stand on trying to maintain its identity through enforcement or through application, probably a better way to put it, application of some of the elements that are contained within our development guide on new development. And Andrew, you may want to say a little bit more than that, but I would highly recommend that the planning commissioners in particular become more familiar with the development guide. You know, look through it. Staff is always available to consult with if there's any questions regarding development guide. Some of you may recall that we recently updated the development guide to include some attention to historic guidelines because development guidelines was lacking that. And a lot of that was done in anticipation of when the city would consider the downtown historic district, because our 4 existing historic districts are residential and this one would be commercial. And so we wanted to make sure that we had design guidelines then that were applicable to historic districts that could be applied then when either is somebody looking at modifying an existing building or may not be historic, or constructing a new building so that it would better fit in with the character of the downtown area.
Thank you, Pierre. One thing that we do have to be cautious about is to avoid that Disneyland look. We don't want ersatz development that's, you know, new stuff made to look old, but and I think part of our difficulty is that we don't get that many large development projects where we have a chance to look you know, de novo at what would be built, and so we can start at the curb at the street and work our way back to the property to see how we can improve the look and make it reflect our community character. But you're right, in the design guidelines, there certainly is clear direction and also latitude, which we need to extend, and appreciate that you know, different property owners have different aesthetics. But thank you very much. And I don't know if I am not seeing Andrew, but if Andrew has something to add, I'd certainly like to hear that.
Yeah, as the commission's well aware, the site plan review regulations under City Code Section 1049, subsection G, is the design criteria that the Planning Commission, City Council, staff, and of course the public need to mold their project to conform to. And one of the several of the findings that a commission would typically make when it renders a decision would be the consistency to that criteria, as well as the development guide, as Director Rivas mentioned. the city has other reference documents too. I mean, we have a non-motorized transportation plan. We have a pedestrian plan. And those also provide inputs as development occurs or redevelopment of the site. Those types of things get evaluated under. A couple of issues regarding, I think Member Keeney mentioned, what could we do about other business districts? She mentioned Upper Broadway or Broadway in general and Placerville Drive. Yeah, I think it was before the recession, so early to mid 2000s, the city did have some public input, in fact, lots of public input on a couple of projects related to design, mobility in the Placerville Drive corridor, as well as the Broadway corridor. Due to the timing of when these things were adopted, and of course the recession, there are perhaps some of the reasons why they have not been fully implemented. I have kind of raised that question to senior staff here in the city as to where we are with some of these documents. And the reason for asking that question to staff was that we are now getting calls from people who want to redevelop or develop vacant lots. Since towards the end of this COVID period, I can tell you just from my own time working the phones and working at the counter, we're getting lots of inquiries about developments of properties. A lot of properties are for sale. And so to make this long story short, I do have some questions on where we are on some of these plans and whether or not they're still viable. And I know that may come to a head in which where city council may weigh in on this and see where we are with some of these plans and whether we want to move forward or go in a different direction. I won't put Director Rivas on the spot, but I know he and I've had this conversation. The outcome of those could affect design in those particular corridors. I guess that's what I was getting to try to address Member Keeney's question.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Friend, did you have something to add? Yeah.
Just a couple of probably minor comments. I think this whole topic is incredibly important. Placerville Drive perhaps begins at the In-N-Out Burger, one might argue. And it's no secret that I've never been a fan of, the businesses are fine, but I've never been a fan of the huge sign, the lighted sign that went up. I think it was at the very end of Trent Saxton's term on city council. Something very different could have been done there. And we cannot lose sight of where the community might be on some of these things. That right before I became a planning commissioner, those many years ago, the planning commission prior to me had approved the In-N-Out Burger, but had expressly prohibited the use of the palm trees, which is their chevron, their signature logo, right? And Pierre probably recalls, Andrew knows of it from history, I think, because I don't think Andrew was on staff yet. The community was really divided over whether or not they should be allowed to have that. There was a lot of community pushback against the planning commission coming in and trying to, the trees went in, and then the reason being given then was, oh, it was a mistake, but we wanted them taken out. And that just became a really messy kettle of fish, as it were, but the community was not really solid with that. So we have to think about where the community is. That then kind of relates to, frankly, our community. And there are tremendous pressures, in my perspective, there are tremendous pressures that have started and are going to continue based upon the migration from the west of us up here. And so being able to maintain our sense of place that was really critical, I think, in that discussion. The sense of place of Placerville, right? We're going to have to be very strong and definitive. I'm going to be very explicit about our sense of place. And I think the director is absolutely right. We need to go back and review those documents. We need to go back and review those design guidelines, and we need to advocate, defend, and uphold them. Okay. So I think it's going to become even more difficult than it has been in the past. And it's personally very important to me that we're on point with this. I think we have a very difficult job, a very important job ahead of us. So that's all I have to offer, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Any other commissioners have any comments or reflections on the video?
I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, I do think the character of the community is very important, and that the question is, what is that vision? And I think that sort of gets back to what Andrew was talking about, you know, with these documents that were put together. Is that still our vision for Placerville Drive? Is it our vision for Broadway? And how is that vision changing? I think, you know, we talked about there are a lot of new people coming into the community, and they have a voice too, and their vision may be different. And so I think we need to kind of look at that as a whole. So that's my comment.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Commissioner List, do you have anything to add?
As we think about planning for Placerville, I think that we also need to think about the surrounding community of El Dorado County and how that plays into what our vision of place is. And sometimes I wonder what that is in terms of the county. It's different for El Dorado Hills than it is for Cameron Park and so on. And at some point, I think that we need to tie that all together. And I don't have a magic wand to be able to say how to do that, but you know, we can stick up our little light, and it's not going to be as bright as if we have other people doing it also. So that's it.
Good, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Friend. Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, and I'll just kind of direct this to staff and ask, because I do agree with Nicole's comments, that we have, as more people come here with different experiences and understandings and whatnot, would there not be value in staff bringing back, just as at a very high level, 30,000 foot overview of some of the various documents, you know, that we could present informationally, not asking anything to be recreated, but just perhaps a summary of the key documents and what those visions are outlined. That would be my first question. And then I've always thought that we do have some distinct areas within Placerville. Certainly the historic downtown is absolutely one of them. The Placerville Drive is absolutely one of them. Upper Broadway and Upper Broadway, and even Smith Flat. And those are all unique communities, Cedar Ravine, unique areas of our community. And I think each of them deserves special attention. And it'd be nice to know, you know, what types of visions exist for each of those. So, and it just might be educational for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll echo that I definitely will be going to revisit the development guideline with some of the information that we took today in mind with my perspective when I'm reading it. So I think that will be helpful, and I encourage all commissioners to go back and review so we are familiar with the tools that we have in place versus maybe what our ideas are, our visions, what we've heard from the community and things like that. So good food for thought, and definitely a nice way to circle back around to this topic with some information and some new perspective. Okay, cool. So anything else from anyone on that video, the educational portion? Okay, seeing nothing. We'll go ahead and move on to our favorite well-defined matters from commissioners and staff. Staff, do you have any communications for us or matters to discuss?
I mentioned earlier on the agenda, the city had received 2 comments, and they will be provided to you in the comments portion of the next meeting that we will hold on that topic. I don't, at this particular second, believe we will have a meeting on, I guess it's the 18th, 2 weeks from tonight. I do anticipate, however, the meetings in June to be utilized. I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Pierre, anything, or you good?
We're good.
Okay. Do commissioners have anything? Yes, Commissioner Brent.
Of course I do. I just wanted to let my fellow commissioners know that I made a recommendation to Andrew and Pierre that the language that we adopted for 9N in our bylaws, right, that we kind of fly that in on the cover page of our agenda, you know, where we describe, for example, what the consent calendar is. So just to bring that language forward. So, because people aren't reading our bylaws, right, even though they're public, but that way it explains what it is. And I think the response on that recommendation was favorable. So thank you.
Fantastic. Sounds good. Helpful document.
Yeah. So I did recently attend the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board's strategic planning workshop. So they're working on developing a new strategic plan. And there was a couple of topics I thought were relevant. One specifically was serving small foothill communities, activities conducted in upstream mountainous areas, which I think would apply to us. So, and then the last was sort of pollution and trash impacts to rivers and streams from homeless encampments. So those are some of the strategic planning items they're looking at there. We are within their district, and their draft plan will be coming out in August.
Okay, great. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Any other commissioners have anything that they'd like to bring up prior to adjournment? Okay, great. Well, thank you all for attending, and we will see you most likely in June, it sounds like. So I will officially adjourn the May 4th meeting of the Placerville Planning Commission at 8:12 p.m.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day.
Evening, the
Cinco de
weather.
Mayo tomorrow. May the 4th be with you.
Oh, yes. All right. Have a good one, everyone.
Good night.